let's start cruising a little bit. We'll take it to a cruising altitude for Brian Ortega taking on Diego Lopes. Guys, this is going down at 145 pounds. And I must say, I wrote this fight up before, so I've already given some thoughts about this one. I love both these guys, right? It's like I hate fighting sometimes because they pit your favorite fighters against each other, and then you got to decide, right? It's like deciding between who's your favorite kid. You never want to give an answer. But when you're looking at this kind of fight, I'm saying to myself, a guy in Brian Ortega, he cashed me out nicely against Yair Rodriguez last time, but he gave me 3 heart attacks, guys. The guy's jumping up and down before the fight. He blows out his ankle, right? So I'm seeing him roll his ankle. I'm having a heart attack in real time. Then he's out there getting absolutely walloped for about 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. I was like, oh my God, this is a disgustingly poor representation of what we need to see right now. And eventually, guys, he's able to get the fight into the grappling phase. He's able to use his wrestling. And there's versions of Brian Ortega that could definitely beat Diego Lopes, right? If you look, the Brian Ortega that beat Korean Zombie is the best Brian Ortega that I ever saw personally. And it's a guy that fought so calculated, so controlled, but he remained violent, dangerous, lethal throughout. And you saw in that fight great examples of different things he could do. He could mix up the level changes to his takedowns against an elite BJJ guy. He could go out there and fight for 5 hard rounds. He could go out there and land big spinning elbow, take the trajectory of the fight and change it completely. Korean Zombie after the fight said, I don't remember what happened after the second round. Like he got hit so hard, he forgot what time it was. So you think about this guy, and Brian Ortega has put on absolute master classes before inside the octagon. I mean, first man to ever knock out Frankie Edgar. And not only did he knock him out, guys, he absolutely sent him to the land of wind and ghosts. He was landing big shots. He was landing big elbows. And then he went whing, uppercut through the roof. And, he took Frankie with him, lifted him off of his feet. So this guy, Brian Ortega, packs a punch. He's got great skills. He's an excellent ground fighter. I just think that his body is falling apart at this point in his life and career. And against Yair Rodriguez, he's basically in a fine position to withdraw his arm, right? In order to get out of an arm bar, in order to get out of some of these situations, you have to do what's called a limp arm. And instead of having a lot of tension, right, you could have tense arms or you could have a limp arm and just let your arm go limp and pull it out of a situation that's tight. And so if you're in a wrestling whizzer and somebody's trying to barrel down on it hard, you might have to limp arm your way out of it. You understand? So I think that when you look at, this guy, Brian Ortega, he went to do a simple limp arm, right? Limp arm out of a arm bar. And he hurt his shoulder really bad to the point where he had to call off the fight instantly. Okay. And then I see, a guy in Brian Ortega go out there against Yair Rodriguez, and in the rematch, he hurt himself again, and he almost got TKO'd. So Yair is a unique case. He's a very talented fighter on the feet, but on the ground, he's a complete question mark, right? He's got some decent offensive jiu-jitsu, but we've seen guys like Frankie Edgar in the later stage of his career take him down and audit him in every position. Volkanovski was like, why would I fight this guy on the feet when I could easily just take him down on the ground and beat him up? And then, by the way, beat him up a little bit on the feet too. So Yair's a guy that's got great offense, very potent on offense, but he almost got knocked out by Josh Emmett, and he got hurt by Ortega a little bit, and then he got taken down and absolutely routed on the ground. He got exhausted within 7 minutes. So there's a lot of things that are questionable about a guy like Yair. And I think that when I'm looking at a guy like Diego Lopes, he hasn't been beating the same quality of opposition. He hasn't fought the same quality of opposition that a guy like Brian Ortega has. But when he fought a guy like Movsar Evloev, another guy who looks like he's a top-end guy in this division, a guy who's on his way to this top 5, right? When he fought Movsar, he was able to go out there and give him a real run on short notice, very short notice. And I bet him as like a +6 whatever underdog in that spot, +6 XX. And guys, he had him in locked-in triangles at the end of rounds, saved by the bell, all this stuff. This guy, Diego Lopes, is a serious offensive threat against everybody, right? His jiu-jitsu, I don't expect his jiu-jitsu to be the kind of thing that goes out there to trouble a guy like Ortega if they're both sober, right? If they're both like here and they just get into a grappling exchange, I do not see Diego Lopes out grappling a guy like Brian Ortega, who's come up with the Gracie, the Henner Gracie crew, who's literally been a prodigy in jiu-jitsu for most of his life. I don't see him doing that. But if he lands one of those big hammers that he's got, if he lands a huge shot, if Brian goes to take him down and he hits a judo throw and puts Brian on his head, then those are the ways I think that you could see his jiu-jitsu maybe have some potency. I think that Diego Lopes is built like a tank. He lands a lot of really hard shots. He's a very dangerous guy, but he takes a ton of risks. He's a guy that comes in throwing. And one thing to consider, guys, that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about is Diego Lopes trains in Mexico. He trains Mexican fighters. He has a great reputation and respect for the Mexican people, by the Mexican people. He lives and trains amongst them, right? But he's a Brazilian guy. Diego Lopes is from Brazil, right? And meanwhile, Brian Ortega is a Mexican-American, basically standout fighter for a long time, fought at the top of the UFC, and he's a star. He's a guy that's, he translates on social media. People know who this guy is. They respect Brian Ortega. He's been in title fights. He's been at the top echelon. And you look at the losses over time. He's lost to, basically the best guys. He had the injury, like I mentioned, against Yair. He lost to Alexander Volkanovski. And if you guys remember that fight, I've bet against Volkanovski just a handful of times, okay? I think this will be an interesting exercise, all right? Let's see if we can find this. So Brian Ortega, here we go. Here we go. We're going to look at my history betting on Alexander Volkanovski because I think it can be illustrative of what I'm trying to get across here. So if you look, I've basically only bet against Volkanovski 3 times in his UFC run. And the 3 guys, I could give you the simple rationale. I bet against him with Brian Ortega because I said before the fight, Brian Ortega for me was the most dangerous guy Volkanovski had ever fought. He had the jiu-jitsu, he had the power on the feet, and I was like, this guy is going to kill him or die trying. And he did everything in his power to win that fight. And I truly believe that we have seen Brian Ortega spend himself for victory in the cage, and it just didn't go his way in some of the biggest fights of his career. And that sucks, but it's just the truth, right? And he's a guy that deserves the credit and the respect, the payment, everything, right? Because he's a gangster and he went out there and threw down in ways that most people never will, right? We talk about the style of fighting we love to watch. This guy had nothing to offer Max Holloway on the feet, and he tried to walk him down for 20 minutes. He tried to throw every round. He tried to keep going, and Max was giving him lessons. He felt so bad for the big skill disparity. But this guy just did not ever stop trying to pursue victory. And the same thing can be said against Volkanovski. Guys, so many people, when the referee is like asking, like, do you remember what day it is? And like all these different things, they would have just found the way out there. And this guy finds a way to just like BS his way through a talk with the referee while he's clearly concussed. This man wants the smoke. He is all about that action. So doubting the heart and the toughness and the will of Ortega would be a huge mistake. But I just doubt a little bit at this point the durability, because I've seen a lot of examples now where he can get hurt, he can get cracked. And not just, I'm talking about the striking, right? Because he's a very durable guy. He's very hard to hurt with strikes. But what I mean is he's just falling apart physically, where his limbs are having a hard time holding up. He's having a hard time not getting injured in the pre-fight warm-up. And he really struggles to make it to these fights. We saw that he was supposed to fight Diego Lopes, and Diego Lopes made it to that fight, guys. Brian Ortega did not. Brian Ortega had to pull out of that fight. He had to say, hey, I can't make it. I can't make the weight. I'm not feeling well. I'm feeling sick. He's got to make the weight now. And he had already talked about, if you guys remember my last breakdown, in the lead up, I need to get down in weight. I need to, because I wanted to move up to 155. That was my move. I was going to move up to 155. So now his move up to 155 has been delayed. Do they want him to go kill a contender at 145 and then move up to 155? It all just seems to be a little bit in between, right? I feel like Diego Lopes has no question what his job is, which is to go out there and get a title shot, to go out there and earn his spot. And for Brian, I feel like he's a little bit in limbo right now in terms of the motivation. I think he wants to win. I think he wants to go out there and compete and represent. But I do wonder, what is his path to the title? What is he really expecting here? And the thing that I wanted to note about this is Volkanovski at the time was the best fighter in the world, in my view. And I thought Brian Ortega at plus 150 was a decent enough bet to go half a unit shot there. I also was on Volk against Max in the third fight when people were not expecting They were thinking Max was value at the plus money, and I was like, I think Volk's going to finish him. I was wrong about that, but I thought it was going to be the case, right? When you look at the Yair fight, another time where I went just a half unit against Volk, because these are guys that offer some threats, but they didn't have the same defense, right? A guy like Ilia Topuria, I felt like checked all the boxes. He was marketable. He had everything. He kind of checked all these boxes. And so for me, when I look at these guys and their results, I've done very well, with a guy like Ortega, right? If you look at Ortega, I've had a lot of good success, but one of the squarest bets I ever made in my life was trying to fade Brian Ortega at this similar price range. So I'll just tell you guys, learn from my mistakes, right? You fade Brian Ortega at minus 180 at your peril, because I thought it was going to be easy money, right? I thought it was going to be Chan Sung Jung, catching Brian Ortega at the right time. And I believe, if you guys remember, Brian Ortega fought Max Holloway and got beaten so bad it looked like he might never fight again. It was that kind of beatdown, right? It was so bad. It was brutal. And you don't often associate Max Holloway fights with like absolute like brutal beatdowns. That was one of them. He's been getting better at that over the course of his career, and absolute drubbing. And he responded to that with a huge win. He responded to that in a huge way. So this guy, Brian Ortega, has got balls. He's got courage. He's got heart. He's got skills. He's got destructive capabilities. He checks a lot of boxes. But I think the same thing is true of Diego Lopes, right? And I just think that when you're looking at a guy like this, who's 29 years of age, he's on the right side of his prime. He hasn't been in those same amount of damaging fights at the UFC level, where he's going 25 minutes with a guy that's trying to take his head off, like Max Holloway, like Alexander Volkanovski. Both those guys took years off the life, potentially, of Brian Ortega. And, to see a guy that's going to have this slight size advantage as well in Lopez, those are all things I'm taking into account here, right? He's the younger guy. He's the bigger guy. He's had more professional experience. But you're also seeing that this is a guy, you got to respect Brian Ortega. You got to respect his capabilities, but we're looking back and he's 5-2 as a UFC underdog. Sensational, 83.7% return on investment. The thing is, Diego Lopes has done the right things as well. When he's been favored to win these fights in the UFC, he's 3-0. Right, in this recent run, minus 275 against Ige, got the decision win, minus 135 against Sadiq Youssef, knocked him out in the first round, minus 164 against Gavin Tucker, got the submission in the first round. This guy has been absolutely sensational. So both of these guys are money. Both these guys are absolute hammers, and I'm excited to see this one shake out. I got to give you a lean. I'm going to lean towards the Diego Lopez side. I picked him last time they were scheduled to fight. I think with a full camp, I don't change too much here, but exactly, Luke. It's two of my favorite guys, so I'm brutal. I'm brutal on this fight, man. It's a difficult one. Let's see here. Brian has a lot of sharps on him, but the line isn't moving much. Man, I'm not sure about that. That's curious to me. But yeah, I definitely know some sharps that like that side. Technically, when we're in the Star Wars universe, okay. I lost something along the way there, guys. Glenbot says Crispy Bacon Nation. Absolutely. You know that's true. I am the Crispy Bacon Whisperer. If you guys aren't following me on X, you're missing out on a lot of great bacon content in addition to the fighting. So something you want to take full advantage of, right?